Hey everybody! I'm excited to welcome our special guest in this episode here in Thriving in Construction, the podcast. He's Lunacon's assistant project manager. But before working with Lunacon, he'd been with various construction companies and worked on different projects. He had already worked with project management teams for large construction companies during his early years in construction. He collaborated with subcontractors and material suppliers and developed project objectives by reviewing proposals and plans, among others. Without further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Christopher Corona, Lunacon's Construction Group Assistant Project Manager. Christopher, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am very grateful for the opportunity to interview you. We hire you, and I know, and I've seen you grow in our company and in the industry. So I can't wait for people to hear more about you, your experience in construction, because I think this is a great opportunity for people to come into the industry, a younger generation. So can you please tell more about you, your journey? How did you get into construction to our audience?
Absolutely. Yes. My name is Christopher Corona. I am 26. I've been working at Lunacon for about 2 years here. About how I got into construction is actually its own kind of funny story, because when I was coming out of high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I was pretty good at math and physics in particular. And I had spoken to, my grandfather and my mother about things before. And I was kind of like still in that phase where you're like super into politics, super into law when you were younger. And one of the ideas that I had come up with was, well, I will undergrad for mechanical engineering. And if I do well and want to continue more, I could maybe get into contract law or something like that for construction. And if that wasn't what I chose, I could always turn around and use my mechanical engineering degree to get a job doing something that I knew I'd be comfortable with. And in my freshman year of college, came back home for summer, and my mother had pushed me to do an internship with her company because they had an internship that was available almost every summer that went unused. And mostly she wanted me to be doing something rather than nothing when I was home.
But what company?
It was called Curlin, Florida. We are a plumbing contractor.
Okay.
They're out South Florida. So the first year I interned there, I was pretty much an admin. I went around making copies of submittals and RFIs and sending them out and calling contractor, asking for paperwork. And it was, pretty simple desk job is what I would call it. And I know after my first summer there, one of the admins went ahead and chewed out one of the project managers and says, if he comes back, you better give him a better, more inclusive experience. And the next summer I came back and I worked on site at the Hard Rock Stadium renovations in South Florida. And Curlin was doing a lot of work there. They were doing the pipe fitting as well as the plumbing, as well as the rainwater leaders from the top. So that whole big system, if you look above you when you're in the stands there, that whole system was built on the ground and lifted up by crane. And that was really like when construction clicked for me. Being on site there every day, seeing the progress day to day, walking the field and seeing how things were developing. Again, that's a fast-paced job because you got to be ready for the open of the season. So that summer was push. And to be in there, every morning with the superintendents with their list of like, this guy's, we got to do this and got to do this, and I need 3 guys over here, and we got this, and the inspection's tomorrow, and and that's really where like I fell in love.
You did,
yeah.
With the craziness.
With the craziness, it's exciting. It's really exciting to really see what comes from your effort, and I think that's something that's always, what gives you satisfaction, especially in an industry like construction. You can always look back and be like, I did that. 10, 20 years later, the building will be there, even if they've renovated it. You can sit there and be like, I remember when this was like this and we did this, and you won't believe the inside, and oh my gosh, this mistake was made and we had to do all this to make it right. By the time it opened, it really lends itself to stories as well as the people you met, the superintendents that worked out there, Eric, Jimmy Calvert, these kind of people. I'll never forget, the lessons they taught me. Something about simple as plumbing, something flows downstream, is most people would probably think about it. Accidentally calling a pipe fitter a plumber. I learned the difference between the two very quickly there.
So what's the lesson that you learned from them? One of the biggest lessons you learned?
One of the biggest lessons I learned. That's where most of my skills background is from. We were having a conversation before we came on where we were discussing the different things you learn in school and learn in the field. pretty much everything I've learned about, actually doing project management, I learned, the importance of RFIs. And that's like a project so big, the architect's on site, where you write an RFI, you submit it through the electronics submission service, and you walk over to his desk and you point it out and you talk to him, you walk on the site and you get your answer that day. The importance of, all the correspondence and the correlation with all the trades that you're working with. That's also where I actually got trained for safety. We had a safety guy that would check in about once a week, and they were a little more stringent than that, so they wanted somebody there full time. So I went ahead and I got trained to do OSHA, and I would go ahead and do the safety walks for that project and do the weekly safety meetings.
This happened with the at Kirkland?
With Kirkland, yes.
Yeah, Kirkland is a big plumbing company.
I didn't know, because when you're a kid and you're like, oh, my mother works there, you don't think anything of it. And then you go out there and you're on a stadium renovation project, and the next projects I helped them out with was Ballpark at the Palm Beaches up, I believe it's in close to Haverhill Road up in West Palm, I believe. I didn't quite fathom the depth of what the company did until I was there. And yes, they're very large plumbing HVAC.
No, they're very, 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 very good company. Very good company. You figure out that this is what you fall in love with construction.
Yes.
And then what? How old are you when this happens?
So this is probably summer 2015. Summer 2015, yes, is when that project was going on. So
right before deciding where to go, what career to select?
Right, yeah. So that'd be after my second year of college. So I finish up doing stuff with college, and in 2018, I get my first project management job. I get hired by a very small company called Quantum Mechanical up in West Palm, and they were actually doing schools for Palm Beach County. And so they were kind of doing a double part, where they were kind of on with project management with the GC, who was Roebling Architecture and Construction. And we were kind of like, they had like a minority quota. So our company filled the minority quota as well as being the plumbing contractor. So in per the contract, they needed an assistant superintendent / assistant project manager on site. So I worked on site at a school called New Horizons Elementary School in Wellington. And I was, kind of like during the day, I was the assistant superintendent to a man named there, Jesse, who was a great teacher. They had a great system up there. And, and then as well, I was also functioning as the assistant project manager for Quantum when running the plumbers that we had out there and coordinating their work with the other trades. And so I kind of served this dual purpose role. And we also had a school down the street. But we had another school over there where the plumbers would work. And I occasionally go over there and check on the work there as, the assistant project manager for Quantum. And that summer, about a couple weeks after I had started, the superintendent, Jesse, ended up having I think something was wrong with his pancreas. And he called me one morning and he was like, hey, I don't feel good. I'm going to the hospital. The keys are on the desk. And I was all of a sudden in charge of running the project for the school and had to have it open by the end of the summer. Now, I was fortunate that we had a really good system. So we were doing multiple buildings, and we had multiple buildings, and they kind of had like the central area that was all exposed. And we would do building by building by building. So the trades kind of worked in a circle around the property. So, all I had to do was, keep on track of who follows who, call them, make sure they can be the next day, get them scheduled, how many days do you need, and then coordinate with the next trade. I need to get you in here. And it was, really simple, really easy that they set that up. The PM from Roebling was available to me. I would call and be like, hey, I want to make sure everything's going right. Or, I called the superintendent for the project named Victor Jester, one of the most amusing people I've ever worked with. Great guy, always looking to teach me something. He'd always come down and be like, oh, you got this going today? You got this going today? Or you got your laborers? Do you know if your laborers are working? Make sure to check in on them every hour because we're paying them. Like, okay, Victor,
No, but I'll tell you what I hear is that you had a couple of people in the field, superintendents, which superintendents tend to be typically teachers because you don't learn how to be a superintendent anywhere. You go to school, but you will never learn how to be a superintendent. The sequence of construction, what starts, what goes next, how do you coordinate people, what production, you have an idea. I mean, it's a trade that it's really not documented. How they do and how do they figure it out? They look at something in a drawing and they see the building already. They see the whole thing in their heads in a 3D, and then they go about to make it happen, and they apply means and methods based on how to, some people do things one way or another, but there's not only one way to skin a cat, right? And so individuals what is fascinating is that the way you talk about a system, the way they train you and the way they divided the work and the quality of the people that they had in their team and subcontractors and that level of commitment. One day he's like, oh, I'm not going, but all hell didn't break loose.
Right.
So it's commendable from their end and also from your end too, because you were willing to step up and go to the challenge, and you allow yourself to be trained by them and coached. Many people don't do that. So I really applaud you for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember I went ahead and I called my boss at the time and I was like, hey, Robling's guy is out. Is it okay if I work the extra hours and stay later? Is it okay if I come in on the Saturdays? And he's like, they help us, we'll help them. No problem. And I remember getting up there, 7:00 morning on the Saturdays, help the tile guys in and, really make sure, the schedule was met, because it's one of those things. The school opens. You can't be not done. It is not an option.
But sometimes people fade away from those challenges. Mm-hmm. And when I have had to be in charge of a project, when you understand the outcome and you just explained it, you do whatever it takes to make it happen.
Right.
I want to ask you, when you now that in retrospect, you've had experience in the field and you have experience also in the management side. I know a lot of what you do, it's related to project management work, assistant project management, documentation. When you look at the two, the field and the administrative side of construction, because people don't necessarily understand that that's a role, and it's a very, very important role. How do you see the two? How do you see the distinctions? And in comparing it also with what you learn at school?
So I think what most of the stuff, what you learn and what you do in the field, it's a lot more practical. And I think it's entirely necessary to get a greater understanding of what actually happens. It's one of those things to look at a piece of paper and say, a pipe goes here, right? And, you can pull out a tool and it'll tell you how much that kind of pipe will cost to do that many feet. And it's another thing to go out in the field, open the access panel, if there is one. How am I going to get at it? How am I going to look at it? How am I going to do the work? Is there a bunch of pipes? Is there a conduit run that's underneath the pipe I'm trying to remove and replace? If there is, how do I do it? Can I gain access through a different way? And what you really have to look at it is both sides are problem solvings, but problem solvings for different things. The field is more trying to problem solve for what's there, for the conditions they have, to get what it meets the drawings. And then the project management side is to problem solve, how do I get the funds for this? What's this accounted for? How do I prevent being caught off guard for this, before or next time? How do I explain this to the owner in a favorable way so they understand that, look, we looked at it like this and, we didn't realize that, there was this unforeseen here, and it's a lot about problem solving both sides. And without the field and without the office, you're gonna lose one end.
So it's planning.
It's planning.
And it's communication.
Exactly. Communication is number one in construction. It is. I know a lot of people will say that about any job that you need to be able to talk, but really, especially as a general contractor, there's so many people you have to be in communication with. You have to be in communication with your subcontractors. You have to be in communication with the staff at whatever building you're working at. If it's already in, where we have the schools, we have to be in relation with the janitors. We have to be in relations with the principals. And we're meeting, even sometimes with the teachers, they'll have concerns about what's going on in their classrooms and they'll be asking questions. We have to be communicative with the owner. We have to be communicative with the architect. A lot of what you do is, taking, the raw things you get from the field. I remember when I was working on Jackson West, I get an RFI, and my RFI is a badly worded text message from a superintendent that I now have to sit down and go, okay, what drawing is he talking about? Where's the actual condition? Maybe I'll walk out and take a picture of it so I can show the architect, what I'm looking at and what we're trying to solve, and then communicate that to a way in the architect can go ahead and take, this one sentence I got from somebody into something they can really make as a change to their drawing.
Right. And that's typically the way it happens. Superintendents, I had a superintendent that he would call me, he almost grabbed me by the neck and say, hey, come here. He was going to tell me about an RFI. And he would be like, come, let's go. And before I know it, I was on top of the building and I'm walking and, I'm stepping on rebar, on 2x4s. And I love the way he trained me. And I was an engineer already, but it ain't the same. You graduate and then I think learning starts in the field, in actual doing it, because you don't really learn that in the university. And before I wrote the RFI, I would see the situation and then obviously compare it with the drawings and so on. Like you beautifully articulated. So you tell me why or what can we do to bring into the construction industry more young people? What's lacking? What can we do to attract more youth into our industry? An industry that I think needs more people that can come innovate. How do we do things differently? How do we do it more efficiently?
I think one of the major areas with construction is a lot of people don't know about what's new about construction. If you ask somebody, what does a construction project look like, today? How is it handled? They probably, a guy in a field with drawings in his hand, twisting them around, going, how do I make this in pages? But, really explaining to them, a lot of what we do is digital now. And I don't think enough people realize that the technical aspect, is really helping this industry more than anything else. It allows you to take offs really quickly. It allows you to compare drawings. I remember the first time I worked with Bluebeam, and I did overlay, and I overlaid 2 pages. And I was like, oh, this is the plumbing change for my change order right here. It's, this little it's this run of pipe right here. I send that to my estimator. There's so much more to do in construction than just what seems. Because most people think in construction, it's funny when people ask me what I do for work that I've never met before. And I have to sit there and I pause and I go, I work in project management for construction. And, that sentence means nothing to them. They look at it and they're like,
construction. Are you like laying blocks?
Yeah, and then, they look at me and they're like, you don't work in the field, right? It's like, no, I'm not out, installing or lifting pipe or anything. But, it's, I think people just don't understand. They only see what's out there, right? You only see the guys in hard hats and reflective vests walking around, building something, installing something. You might know a tradesperson. Oh, I know a plumber. And, he goes in and he installs pipe. But I don't think enough people know what goes on in the tier above that. I don't think a lot of people understand all the intricacies that make construction interesting. How do you take drawings and get from there? How do you get the correct people on board to do what you need to do?
How do you deal with tough situations? Have you ever had a schedule that you need to do something and the subcontractor doesn't show up or they don't want to do it this way? Or have you ever had a challenge of that nature?
I'm trying to think of like a specific incident in mind, but I can always reflect back, to situations prior where we had, I believe at the, I think this happened when I was on the Hard Rock Stadium, that the electrical guys with the plumbers, right? And the plumbing is supposed to go above the electrical, right? But I think we were pending an RFI or something. And the electrical guys, were like...
plumbing above electrical?
Again...
The contrary.
Somewhere...
The contrary. You don't want the plumbing above the
right, because you don't want the water leak down. Right. For whatever reason, I think it was like IT... It was something got installed...
Correct.
Below where it might have been the pipe fitters for the gas and stuff that might have been above. That, we had to go in and the electricians were like, sorry, we're keeping the schedule. And they installed. And, now we're in a position where, well, what do we do? And you're like, well, it's like, well, we just... of course, we got the one superintendent who's all upset. He's like, well, just tear their stuff out of there and, make them pay for it and do it twice because they shouldn't install it. They should know the sequence, and having to sit down, and go to the GC and sit down with the other trade and go, okay, you've made your point. You've installed your material to maintain the schedule. And now we can't do our work. And you have to sit down and, really, because obviously they don't want to remove it for free. They don't want to replace it for free.
But then the question is, the problem is for them in their minds is like, okay, if I'm stopping because you haven't done your work, then I'm still paying. It's still costing me. Exactly. Who's going to pay me for that?
Right.
So unless you tell me to stop, I'm not stopping. I'm maintaining my schedule.
Yeah.
Now, sequence and schedule, and I comprehend that. But obviously it's more complex than that.
Right.
Because it creates a lot of problems when something like that happens.
Exactly. And it's one of those things where, had there been a conversation before?
Yeah.
A sitting down beforehand of like, hey, I need to maintain my schedule. You guys aren't up to schedule with your work.
Yeah.
And obviously maybe that's not a conversation, but maybe it is a conversation we have with us. Maybe we didn't realize this was important to get done this second. I can get guys over there to get started doing that run. And maybe, we can work out the problem together. Or, maybe it's something we have to go up and go, hey,
Totally. So how do you handle it? How did the person in charge handle it?
I believe what they told them was to work with us, to not completely remove their product, but to kind of like hang it, to kind of take it down and hang it in such a way that we could work above it, and then to rehang it, and to coordinate better next time.
Yeah.
Like you said, the electrician doesn't want to stop because that hurts his cash flow. It hurts, he can't, have a bunch of guys standing around with their hands in their pockets, right? And the owner doesn't want to pay for that. And of course, we don't want to eat a back charge for them doing it twice, So, you got to
Nobody wants to pay.
Yeah, you have to find the happy medium of like, okay, you've made your point. And so, and I think it's always one of the hard parts about construction when you get down to that question of like, well, who pays for this? And that's when everybody's like, well, I don't know.
And sometimes not having an answer for that actually ends up costing you more money.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, those are hard conversations, but the sooner you have them, the better off we are.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it's just that we focus on what we're losing, but we don't understand the impact of not making a decision earlier on. What happened. And we had a conversation before with Emilio Alvarez, and he was talking about the trickle down effect, of somebody's on the top and they put the pressure on the second in charge, which is, let's say the owner, then the general contractor, then subcontractor, and then the trade, whatever supplier, material vendor. And it's just pressure without sometimes a dialogue. What we're saying is dialogue early on and communication could actually save us some of the headaches that we end up having. So tell me more about these conflicts in the construction space as it relates to documentation, when we don't agree with, we see eye to eye, but we don't agree with, I guess we don't see eye to eye. Tell me more. How do you think we handle that? What has been your experience?
So I think one of the best ways is to always directly reach out with all the parties involved and all the parties to concerns with. And I remember I used to do this when I would write RFIs for one of my projects, and I would walk over to the architect and I was like, hi, I'm writing this RFI. I know you don't really want to give me a productive response to this because, you say the ownership isn't accepting any change orders. This can't be done at a cost. But like, work with me. What is a real answer you can give me? And I will ask the question you can actually answer. So, we don't waste our time. I don't come in here, ask you a question you really can't answer, authorize work you can't really authorize, and then have me go argue with the owner. Let's work it out here between me and you. What can we do? And I really appreciate that, having that relationship with that architect. And it was something we did multiple times a week where, I'd come in and be like, hey, this is the concern, can we work this out? And just being able to sit down with the other party and communicate, even you can't agree, right? Even if they can't be like, well, if you make a change, it can't be at the cost of the owner. I'm like, okay, what does that look like? Then I can bring the contractor in and go, look, you can do it, but it can't be at a cost. Is that feasible for you? What does that look like for you? And really get everybody talking and working towards a realistic solution rather than asking for something that can't be done.
And a lot of times, what prevents people from being able to have those crucial conversations,
I think it's nerves. I think it's, luckily, like I said, I was very comfortable with that person and it was easy. They were a very inviting person. We had a pretty good relationship. And I think it's either, seeing someone in a specific way and not being comfortable thinking that they're too stringent or they won't work with you. I think a lot of times, you meet someone that's kind of rough around the edges and you tend to take a step back. You don't want to step on that person's toes. But more than anything, you have to find a way to work with that person. If it's going easier on them or if it's having an entire idea when you sit down to talk to them, you can't, bad ideas off of them and work it out, but have your whole entire plan constructed. I think people just get nervous at adversity, and that's normal. No one wants to have a hard conversation, right? It's that saying, when's the best time to have a hard conversation? Yesterday. When's the second best time? Right now. You always have to do something as soon as you can, and you have to put those things beside you, because everybody, at the end of the day, we all have a job. The architect is there to provide assistance. The owner wants to see the project get done. The subcontractors want to do their work and get paid.
Yeah, everyone wants to try to do their best. The thing is that, when the situations matter and you're involved, I believe emotions come out and they get mixed with the facts.
Right.
And a lot of times we have the situation and we're not able to isolate the person from the situation. We internalize, it's my fault, I didn't do my job. And it happens, from the owner side, from the architect side, from the contractor side. But let me go back to your grandpa and your grandma. How important was their role in your life?
So I have, obviously, my two sets of grandparents. So my mother's parents, they were separated very young, but my grandfather lived down here in Florida, and my grandmother lives up in Maine. And my grandfather ran his own business, and he was kind of a self-made man. He came from Cuba when he was 8. He was kind of the
Oh, so you're Cuban.
yes, yes, yes. He was kind of the black sheep of his family. All the ladies were well taken care of, and he had to work a job. He'd tell us he biked to his 2 jobs when he was 14 years old, and tell us that. And when he was young, he enlisted in the military just before Vietnam broke out, and he actually worked as a mechanic. And he managed to use the experience he learned there and to really start building a career for himself. When he first got out, he started doing like photos. He used to do like aerial photos, and then eventually moved down here, worked 2 jobs. I think it's Pan American. They went under in the 80s. He was working for them. And, my mother always told me them going out of business was the best thing that ever happened to my grandfather, because they went out of business. And he said he was talking to one of his friends one day. He's like, yeah, I guess we could fix, planes on, private jets, tanks. He's like, yeah, and we'll call it Executive Tank Service. And sure enough, I have a bunch of t-shirts from Executive Tank Service that my grandfather had when they had that business for many years. And you just never know where life's going to take you. But, he very much knows and the intricacies of running a business, and it, from the ground up. No real formal education. Went through the military, learned everything on the field, on the job himself. He was a mechanic and became an owner.
And you admire him.
Very much so. Very much so.
How influential was he? What's the one thing that you can say he changed my life, my perspective of life? I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for what he said or did that you saw in him.
So, he's such a hard worker. And when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I was looking for a job. He's like, he would work for me. And I went over to his house every summer. We were restoring cars, and he would talk for hours about his life experience and just telling me stories of when it was like to be over in the war areas during Vietnam. Telling me, old conversations he used to have with some of his employees, where they'd be like, Henry, I fixed the planes. Why don't I make more? And he'd be like, well, you want to pay for the lights? You want to pay for the insurance? You want to pay for the, really, it's one of those things where as a worker, you might never think about that. Who pays the electric bill? Who pays to have the hangar to bring all the planes in? Who's made the connections with the people to bring them in? And he really opened my eyes to how business works. How it is to be at the top and look the rest of the way down and have to worry about everything else. He was servicing not only in Florida, he was across a bunch of states and having to fly out of town constantly. And then on the side, like I said, he because he was a vet, he got access to the VA loans in the 1980s, and he started buying up properties. And he would sit down and tell me stories of he would go in to a closing and leave with money. He would get such a good loan and such a good appraisal, he'd leave green before anything had ever started. Is
he still alive?
Yes, and he's always enterprising. I can remember being in high school, and he's like, how do you think if I bought like a Nathan's hot dog stand? There isn't one on the beach. And he still does that to my brother, my younger brother. He's 16 now. He goes over and does my grandfather's pool, and he'll say the same thing. He's like, you want to be a manager? I'm thinking about, but he's constantly moving. He never stops. The day he stops is the day I worry about him. But he's always thinking of something next. He's always looking at the stock market. He's always calling and looking, and he never stops moving. And I love that about him.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure he's a great example. And I think you have some of those storytelling abilities, and you got it from him. Because I think you're good at it.
Oh.
And you have a tremendous voice. So I hope you let him know that you're in this podcast, and I'm sure he's very proud of it.
I'm sure he'll love to get the call.
Yeah. So tell me about college. Tell me about inclusion and diversity. I'm really passionate about getting more people into the construction industry. And I know you said, you got it. You first thought about maybe applying some of passion in the legal area, but then you decided to go into construction. Why was that a passion of yours, maybe, or what did you think about that area?
Right. So when I was in high school, I used to do a lot of academic team, a lot of stuff. One of the big things I used to do for my school was the History Bowl, and it was focused on American history. So I would spend a lot of time studying, or doing practice questions for this, history team, and all this. A lot of time, you focus on the laws and you understand, you learn about the Supreme Court cases and things like that come up a lot in that kind of discussion. Or you learn about, this law caused, the Whiskey Rebellion very early on. in America, and you learn a lot. And I had a lot of interest and passion towards that in the humanities, even though my brain is absolutely more wired than math. Math comes easy to me. Physics comes easy to me. Writing, not very easy for me. And it was very much something that, like, again, like in that moment, and I was kind of like, I think I'd like to pursue something in the humanities. And then, once I was in construction, I was like, this is perfect. It's one of those things where, like, you think you know what to do, and you're like, I can always fall back and being an engineer is like my fallback plan. And then, that internship just changes, it just flips everything. You're like,
but I asked you the question because you reminded me of me when I had to select what career was I going to pursue. And legal is something that I like. Actually, my husband makes fun of me because I always say I want to study law. And he used to tell me, oh, when are you going to do this? In between, this and that, in between running a company and taking care of the kids and all this stuff. Like, hello, how many things are you going to do? He always asks me that question, and I hope he gives up because I'm always doing something new. I love growing. But the legal side of construction has a huge potential for someone that wants to learn, that likes the law. Let's say they don't want to practice. Maybe they don't want to be in the court system, because it's very stressful. But in construction itself presents an opportunity for that area. And have you ever thought about it?
About maybe going back and trying to get back in?
No, not even going back, but maybe focusing more on the contracting side, or maybe focusing more on on risk management.
I think it's something that, like I said, I got my experience through an internship. That I think more companies need to make internships for that available. When people think of law, they think of, purely like trial law. That's the first thing, because it's interesting. But there's so much contract law. Everyone has in construction, you have so many contracts. You have your contract with the owner, you have your contract with your subcontractors. There's so much, potential litigation. There's so much that, just getting somebody inside and looking at that and having someone who even understands what you're talking about when you're breaking down someone's scope. How would a traditionally trained lawyer who, did a humanities for 4 years and then, 4 to 6 years of law school understand a scope?
Let me ask you something. Is that something, because you're giving me ideas, I'm about to call our attorney and have him design that so that you can experience that within our own company. Would you like that?
I think that'd be very interesting.
Yeah.
Again, obviously they don't have to understand,
No, you're not going to be the attorney. But here's the thing. It's going to make you a wider and better professional.
Exactly.
There's so much to learn. I actually want you to learn about marketing too. Because there's so much into this industry, and this is really what the message that I want to convey to everyone. There's the accounting side. People think they learn something. They learn to submit payment applications and go to meetings and so on, but this is just a little bit of the whole. And if you're willing, we're going to design that path so that you doing what you're doing, he can actually do some mentorship. What do you like? What do you think?
I think that'd be interesting. And it'd be interesting to see the kind of person who jumps into that or whom after me would be taking into that, And again, it's a niche. But, sometimes finding your niche is what really works for you. Because if you're the only person that knows this, or you're the only person with experience with it, that makes you incredibly valuable. And that's, it's one of those things I think my mother mentioned to me when I was younger. She was like, no one does this. Contract law is like, especially for construction, how many firms are there in South Florida that you could work with, and to really, develop someone who intimately understands that. I mean, you could hold the market, on some of the largest contractors work down here.
Yeah.
And you could have contracts with some of the largest companies.
I tell you, I kid you not, this is, we're going to continue to be a voice, because a lot of people can really completely transform their lives with this industry. I mean, when you came on board to our company, I realized that you came right after COVID, right?
Correct.
And how did we find you? I know how we found you, but I want you to say it.
Yeah, it was actually through the unemployment website that, I obviously had been laid off by my previous job, as COVID was starting to kick in. And, the lady Yvette, she found me and she gave me a phone call. I remember, not recognizing the number, but knowing I'd been putting applications in and picking up the phone and going, hello, this is Christopher. And, She's like, "Oh, great, Mr." And so I was like, I don't remember my application. And she's like, "Oh no, I found you through Florida Implant." And I was like, "Wow,"
Talking about this time, define a destiny, right? Because I was impressed actually, because typically we don't think we're gonna find who we need, but God is amazing.
Yeah.
And so we're very, very happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm always grateful for the opportunity.
And I want you to talk about diversity and inclusion, how you see it, how you see giving back, how you see, working in a company that is a mission-driven company to help the world. What's your thought about that?
Well, I think especially towards diversity and inclusion, that's, something you always need in construction. You always need to understand other people's perspectives. You can't just come at it from one way and put the square in the triangle hole. You need people from other walks, other parts of the world to really explain, because I bet what we do here isn't like what they do in India or like what they would do in Europe, and there's so many different ways and different styles to do the same job. And without opening up and looking at and seeing what's out there, you're not going to progress. You're going to get stuck doing the same thing over and over and over again. So you always need outside influence, and you always need to be proactive in looking for it. Sometimes it comes to you and you get lucky like that. But, if you're looking for it, you'll find it. As for inclusion, it's one of those things, where we're so close, especially in Florida, to South America. I cannot tell you the number of people I've met who will tell me, I was a doctor, I was an engineer, or I was whomever before they moved, and I really wonder, of course they're doing, more like manual labor now that they're here, but I always wonder, like, when they sit there and actually talk about their trade, they talk about their craft, what they would look like in like a management position or a superintendent position. The kind of the twist they could really provide to you. Maybe they weren't educated here, but maybe we're not really valuing that the way we should.
I totally agree. And sometimes there's a language barrier. Many times that's what it is. And many times the person doesn't think, the immigrant, that they can. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people tell me from Dominican Republic, how the hell did you get to have a company in the United States? I mean, they just don't get it, right? But this is available to everyone,
exactly.
Right? And like you said, how do you go deeper into the person to really understand what they can do, what the value that they can provide? It might be a barrier on the language. How do I help you overcome that barrier so that in this project you can provide more value? How do I help you become more confident? Is there something that you think our industry should be doing that is not doing?
I think one of the things that specifically like some older companies could do is more investment in new blood. There's a lot of times you'll hear about a company that hires a guy and fires a guy, and then a couple months later will hire the same guy for another project. And like it sounds funny and you kind of laugh as I say it, but I'm sure you've heard of that person, or that person, or have worked with a company that's done that once or twice or 4 or 5 times. And I think people aren't really looking at what the other options are. It's safe to go with the person even if that person's had problems, you have differences in the past. Well, maybe you can mitigate it this time. But I think there's a real importance in finding fresh blood and finding people who are willing to learn, because especially in construction, even if you aren't as experienced, hard work betrays no one. If you work hard and you really try to understand and really learn while you're working in construction, it'll go wreck. People are not going to see someone working really hard or really trying to learn something
and not recognize.
If you walk up to somebody and ask them, "Hey, what are you doing?" They'll take the 5 minutes to explain. "Oh, I'm doing this. This is how we do it. This is the materials we use." They'll take the 5 minutes because they really love their trade and really love their work. And if you can learn anything from people like that, it's going to help you a lot going forward.
Yes, I agree. I want to thank you. I'm glad you're here, finally. We're always so busy, but I'm glad you're here. We overcame that thought that Christopher is like, "Oh, this is a podcast for women. I'm not going."
Well, I thought that was the focus, and maybe that was just me not looking and not reading.
I'm actually saying it because I want to make sure that if that's not the case. So
right.
Where we just started somewhere, and it's funny how we started because we are running a company, but that desire to give back and share the knowledge and share value was really the outcome. And we got it started, and now we have, construction is a melting pot.
It is.
And I love it. It is a melting. I'm so grateful that you have been so articulate in sharing your perspective in everything you say. I look forward to many more of these.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Thriving in Construction, the podcast with Patricia Bonilla. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to help support the podcast, please share it with others and leave a rating or review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. If you have any suggestions or any related topics you would like us to tackle in our future episodes, feel free to reach Patricia by sending her a message through the website anchor.fm/thrivinginconstruction or find her on LinkedIn. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week here in Thriving in Construction, the podcast.